Venezuela, Syria, Russia, Iran, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Israel. All of these countries have one thing in common. They're all a part of a global war being waged by the United States. To some, the war is one of nation building and global dominance. To others, it's a life or death battle for the greater good. On the global chessboard, there are three major players: the United States, Russia, and China. All of the other players are nothing more than pawns. This game has been playing out for decades, but it can only have one winner. To better understand the rules of the game, it's important to understand the global economy, world reserve currencies, and the petrodollar. The United States has been able to gain a strategic advantage on the global chessboard, but whether that advantage lasts depends on every future move. The wrong move could give the advantage to the other two players. To better understand the game, it's important to understand both the players and the pawns.
We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world.
In the 1970s, the Nixon administration banned the conversion of US dollars into gold and made an agreement with Saudi Arabia to buy and sell oil on the global market in US dollars. Essentially, the US dollar went from being backed by gold to being backed by oil. In the agreement, Saudi Arabia and other OPEC countries agreed to invest any excess oil revenues into US Treasury bonds and securities. This would eventually become known as the petrodollar. With oil being an essential global resource, every nation wanting to import oil would need to maintain an adequate reserve of US dollars. Today, more than 60% of all global trade is conducted in US dollars, making the US dollar the world's leading reserve currency. It's because of this that the US dollar has maintained a base value and remained valuable enough to keep America's economy running, its debt payments intact, and its military funded. In exchange for only buying and selling oil in US dollars on the global market, Saudi Arabia would get significant military and economic aid from the United States. This economic pact would be controlled and administered by what is called the US-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation. America's long-term goals in the Middle East also favor Saudi Arabia. With the elimination of every military power in the Middle East minus Israel, Saudi Arabia would eventually become the wealthiest and most powerful Arab nation in the region. Israel is the only transparent, multicultural democracy in the Middle East. If you're an anti-Semite, you're angry about this, and you're ready to turn this video off, but that won't change the truth. Israel is one of America's strongest allies in the Middle East and has been the beneficiary of U.S. military and economic aid since it was founded. It also acts as a valuable geopolitical ally for the United States, offering access to both the Middle East and the Mediterranean. If the U.S.'s geopolitical strategy in the Middle East succeeds, Israel would join Saudi Arabia as one of the most powerful, U.S.-friendly nations in the region. That wouldn't be a bad thing. Unlike its neighboring countries, Israel welcomes Christians, Muslims, and atheists with open arms. In Israel, homosexuals aren't stoned to death or thrown from rooftops. In March of 2014, Vladimir Putin annexed Crimea, an important geopolitical part of Ukraine with access to the Black Sea and Baltic Sea via the Dnieper River. Crimea also gives Russia greater access to the Balkans and the Mediterranean. In June of 2014, 2 months after Putin's big strategic move, global oil prices started to collapse. Along with the price of oil went Russia's currency, its oil fortunes, and its potential for further military growth. Russia's oil and gas-dependent economy was pushed to the brink of collapse, and the country's major oil companies, Gazprom, Lukoil, and Rosneft, were forced to cancel projects and to reduce their yearly production estimates by 500,000 barrels per day. So what caused the collapse in global oil prices? It was an overflow of supply that greatly surpassed global demand, thus causing a dramatic collapse in prices. This new global glut was caused in part by two countries dramatically increasing their production throughout the last half of 2014, the United States and Saudi Arabia. A strategic ally of Russia, Syria has played a pivotal role in the ongoing geopolitical battle between Russia and the United States. The elimination of Bashar al-Assad would remove yet another organized military force in the Middle East, strengthening America's position on the global chessboard and eliminating another Russian ally. Keeping Bashar al-Assad in power has, thus, become a strategic imperative for Vladimir Putin. America's enemies in the Middle East are less effective when they are in disarray and chaos, making the removal of Assad and forcing a civil war that would lead to an unmanageable power vacuum a strategic necessity for the United States. By funding moderate rebels who are looking to topple Assad's regime, the U.S. sought to do just that. But with Russia aiding Assad and the spread of ISIS, it hasn't proven to be an easy task. All three nations, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, were toppled by military force or by U.S.-funded rebel groups. Months before he was removed, Saddam Hussein began trading Iraqi oil on the global market in euros. Following his removal, Iraqi oil immediately went back to being traded in U.S. dollars. Although most of Afghanistan's oil remains in the ground, the country has always been a strategic transit route for resources and a valuable geopolitical location with access to neighboring Islamic countries and old Soviet states. Before the U.S. invasion, other nations like the Soviet Union had sought to occupy the country to control new trade and transport routes for resources. Like Iraq, Afghanistan borders Iran and now houses several U.S. military bases that can be used to wage future attacks. Before U.S.-backed rebels toppled the regime of Muammar Gaddafi and dragged his beaten body through the streets, the Libyan president was in talks with other smaller nations to create a new Pan-African currency that would help displace the euro and the U.S. dollar. His intention was to use Libya's vast stockpile of gold to get the new currency off the ground and to begin trading Libyan resources, including oil, in the new currency. Like Libya, China is thought to be stockpiling massive troves of gold. And like Russia, China has one of the world's largest militaries, making any future U.S. military intervention almost impossible. A military conflict between any of these countries would be catastrophic, which is why much of their conflicts are fought quietly on the economic and geopolitical chessboards. To eventually defeat and weaken the United States, both China and Russia have made efforts to eventually undermine and displace the U.S. dollar as the leading reserve currency. With oil remaining to be one of the most important and most traded resources on Earth, controlling oil supplies can help control how it is traded and how much it should cost. China is one of the world's largest importers of oil and the largest owner of U.S. debt. Their continued economic and military growth depends on oil, but China finds itself in a mutually dependent relationship with the United States. If the U.S. economy collapses, China would go with it by losing $1 trillion worth of U.S. securities and by losing one of its major importers of Chinese goods. However, it would be foolish to think China isn't preparing itself for the worst. Of the three players, China has been the quietest and the least provocative. The communist country is the largest military power in Asia, wielding influence over most of its neighbors. It has been quietly building its gold reserves, modernizing its military, advancing its technological research, and putting extra effort into keeping its allies happy. Unlike Russia and the United States, China has deployed a slow and steady global strategy. However, it's only a matter of time before China's slow and calculated move towards world dominance becomes less friendly. Once the country is in a strong enough position, it will start making bigger moves with bigger consequences. To understand where the next big conflicts will emerge, it's important to follow the trail of U.S. dollars and oil. Those who make moves to replace or undermine the U.S. dollar as the leading world reserve currency by either taking control of oil supplies or by establishing new currencies will likely be targeted as enemies of the United States and its allies. It will be easy to get angry when new conflicts emerge and new wars are waged, but it's important to remember who the three main players are and what it would mean if either one of them achieved world dominance. From Peter the Great to Stalin and Putin, Russia has never been referred to as a transparent democracy or a global defender of human rights. From the Han dynasties to the modern People's Republic, true freedom and personal liberty have never been part of life in China. Despite its imperfections, the United States is the only major player that has paved the way for constitutional democracy, personal freedom, and equality. So when it comes down to choosing which of these three sides to be on, the choice couldn't be more clear. With a $20 trillion national debt and a society and allies dependent on military protection and entitlements, the US dollar is the only thing keeping America in the game. And a game without America can only have two potential winners, neither of which would make the world a better place.